Well, good morning. And just before we get to the business of the day, I should say, of course, that in the last few minutes we've received, I think, what is excellent news, but a challenge for us here in the City of Toronto, namely the news release indicating that the Premier will announce later today that Toronto has been moved to Stage 3 effective midnight, 12:01 a.m. on Friday morning. And I think this is as a result of a lot of hard work by Torontonians and our frontline workers that we'll be able to move to this next stage. It seems like a long way from the scary days of the winter when we were having our meetings at the beginning of the pandemic and hearing numbers that were almost beyond comprehension in terms of both actual case counts but also projections as to how many people could lose their lives or become ill. But I think we've always said throughout the piece that if we could work together, and by working together I mean principally people working with each other in the City of Toronto, but also governments working together, governments supporting people and businesses as they have done, that we could come the long way that we've come. And it's taken a long time and it's taken a lot of patience and sacrifice. But I think it's also fair to say that now the hard work really begins. The hard work really begins now, because when you get down to the stage where you have one new case on a given day, which was the case yesterday, there's only one direction to go. And you don't want to go in that direction, but there is only one. Well, I suppose you could go down to zero, and we hope that happens. But after that, we've just got to stay vigilant and making sure we continue to follow the public and health advice in the light of the new freedoms granted by Stage 3 is going to be crucially important. And yes, that's going to involve government, but more than anything else, it's going to involve continued effort on the part of individual people to make sure that we together keep wrestling this thing to the ground and keep it there. COVID-19 doesn't go away just because we're in Stage 3. In fact, the onus on us to make sure it continues to go away and stays away is going to be more so than ever on all of us. We had just one new case in our city yesterday, and we want to continue with that kind of result and that kind of progress as we move to a greater reopening. And we just don't want to go backwards, and that's going to depend on, yes, continued effort by government, continued leadership by all governments and cooperation, but also people deciding that they're going to continue to demonstrate the good personal responsibility they have demonstrated. The province will have more to say on this later today, and so will the city. But I wanted to acknowledge this good news, as well as the acknowledgement that's in the Premier's press release indicating that a number of the additional health-related recommendations that we've made to make sure that bars and restaurants and places like that can stay healthy have been taken into account by the government, and they've said they themselves will have something to say about that later today. So the business of the day that we're here to address today, Deputy Mayor Michael Thompson and myself, and I should say that this entire program that we're about to launch today in reality by actually granting some of the money for the first year of its existence, it was something that was found in the budget for the city of 2020 and approved as brand new money, but it really came from a conversation that I had with the Deputy Mayor and with some experience he had in one of the neighbourhoods in his own ward. And it proves that I think you can take a community-based idea that came from the community and by the community and of the community, that their local representative can bring it here, talk to me, we can talk to our city staff, and here we are not too long after that making this program a reality. The violence, as we know, has been an ongoing issue in our city for some time. It's been a challenge that growing cities like Toronto all across the world have had to confront. We have not been immune to the increasing gun violence that is being seen in cities across Canada. The trend lines are there elsewhere in Canada, but also, of course, across North America. It's an issue that impacts residents and neighbourhoods in a very profound way. The traumatization that it causes to people who are not directly involved in incidents of violence cannot be dismissed. In fact, it is a very serious matter, and addressing it requires immediate attention. Addressing it is something that I've been committed to throughout the time that I've been the mayor. We've made financial commitments to increase investments in community organizations and city programs, along with continued advocacy to other levels of government, because we can't do this alone. Continued advocacy to other levels of government for increasing investment on their part, but also for changes to some of the laws like bail laws. I've said many times in the past that addressing violence will take a multi-pronged approach by all governments with a huge emphasis on increased investment in kids and families. We know that by investing in kids and families, we can address the roots of gun violence, something we have been urged to do time and time again by different studies that have been undertaken. As a government, albeit one that has limited sources of revenue, mainly from property taxes, we need to do our best to invest in the neighborhoods that are being heavily impacted by gun violence. While we need more help, we have to come forward and do what we can with what we have, with more to come from the city for sure. That is why in early May, we launched the Youth Violence Prevention Grant Program, which was established this year in the 2020 budget. This new program provides agencies with the funding to support the de-escalation of youth violence within their own communities. We are distributing approximately $2 million in new annual funding to community organizations for youth violence prevention and intervention projects. These local plans came from the community. They were devised by the community, and I think that will increase the chances of their success. The program will provide real on-the-ground help for a very real problem. The money will be allocated among the 12 community organizations to implement programming in 10 different neighborhoods identified as neighborhood improvement areas or revitalization sites across Toronto. And these 10 communities were selected for investment, this particular investment, based on a data-driven approach that identified a high number of incidents that took place in these areas. The data was compiled from the Toronto Police Service, from the Focus Roundtable organization, from Toronto Community Housing, and from the Community Crisis Response Program, CCRP. We know all too well that the roots of violence and community violence stem from the inequities that some of our residents face. These factors often leave young people and their families vulnerable and susceptible to other challenges and barriers. If they are not addressed and they're left unattended, the inequities can easily evolve into destructive forces, including community violence. And that is why we were so determined to include these grants in the 2020 budget as part of a number of new anti-violence initiatives in that budget, including $6 million in new spending in 2020 alone as 1 year. Today, we are announcing that the community organizations that will receive this critical funding, where they are and which organizations they are through this new youth violence prevention program. The applications have been vigorously reviewed by city staff with outside help. And it includes, and usually, some help from young people actually residing in some of those communities. This is by no means the full list, but a few of the organizations that will be receiving these grants include the Agincourt Community Services Association, Culture Link Settlement and Community Services, East Scarborough Boys and Girls Club and Next Generation Arts, the Flemington Health Centre, the Harriet Tubman Community Organization, and St. Stephen's Community House of the Neighborhood Group. The programming will be aimed at violence prevention and interruption for youth aged 10 to 29. It will include effective community engagement approaches, trauma-informed programming, leadership development, employment development, and mental health supports. And these organizations and their respective projects will focus on working with young people who are more vulnerable to serious violence and crime in communities across the city. Whether it's in Etobicoke or Scarborough or North York or downtown, all communities in Toronto will have access to these services and these supports. The grant program will help us focus on the communities that need additional support the most. In the end, it's about helping kids, it's about helping families, and it's about helping neighborhoods. And so the agencies are partnering up with their neighborhoods, with their communities, and they know their communities the best. And they're already at work on the ground in those neighborhoods and will now be able to do more work to fight violence with the young people and the families. By providing them with the new funding, we know that people will get more help and more help of the kind they need quickly. And we know it's important for this funding to be delivered now. There is no question but that the youth of the city have been affected not only by the violence, which has been a problem for some time, but also profoundly affected by COVID-19 and the impact that's had on a number of areas of their lives. And the two challenges combined have only heightened the level of need that we see across the city. As we start to reopen vital services and amenities like community centres and community pools, and more to come now that we've reached stage 3, we need to find other ways to engage vulnerable youth at a time that has been exceptionally challenging for them, as it has been for many people across the city. So these grants are just one more part of our plan to address the challenge of ongoing violence in the city. We know that we can't stop here, and we won't stop. The new funding is part of the more than $16 million in new investments that we announced in the 2020 budget, and that is on top of the millions of dollars that we've invested in poverty reduction and other initiatives aimed at helping people across the city. We are doing our part with respect to anti-violence initiatives, and we know there's more needed, but we also know that we can't do it alone. I'm confident that the other governments understand the need to make more of these investments, and I will continue to urge them to take action. As recently as last night, I raised this issue again with Minister Bill Blair of the Government of Canada. I've been clear that our repeated requests for more federal assistance with youth and anti-violence funding in light of our especially acute problems is one of the very few instances in which the federal government has not provided the support the city requires, despite our continuous advocacy. I will continue to call on the other levels of government to join us in providing more of this vital anti-violence funding. I want to thank the community organizations who are helping us right now and who will be receiving this funding for which they have applied and for which they had to fill out vigorous applications. I want to thank Deputy Mayor Thompson for bringing forward this idea that had its roots in Scarborough and that I think has now been molded into something that can have citywide benefit for many, many young people across the city and have organizations that we know and that have passed the test do effective work for us in fighting and stopping gun violence. It's going to take hard work. It's going to take determination. It's going to take engagement on the part of the young people, which is what this program is all about, but I think it can make a difference. And I thank the community organizations that have come forward for the work they're going to do, but also for the work they have been doing and will continue to do in such an excellent way. And I want to thank our city staff for the fact that they have put these applications through a very serious review process, and I think that has led to good selections and that will make a big difference in the community. We know that for a whole bunch of reasons, there is much that we must do to make sure that young people in these neighborhoods and across the city have every opportunity to have as bright a future as everybody else. And this is a part of that. And I do, again, want to thank Michael Thompson for his role in making this program come about and ask him to come to the podium now and say a few words.
Thank you very much, Mayor Tory. And before I begin my remarks, I just want to, again, reiterate my thanks to you. We had a discussion about this idea that I had on behalf of a community. I want to say how committed you are in terms of listening, recognizing the need to help the community, recognizing the need that when we help our young people and create an opportunity for them to have a better future, it really helps all of us. And so you have, from day one, indicated a willingness to listen, an appreciation with respect to the concerns in the community right across the city. Your commitment and your leadership is, in my view, absolutely beneficial to all of us, and I want to thank you seriously from the bottom of my heart, because I know the challenges and the impact that the lack of investment in our young people, particularly black kids in this city, is actually having on the families, communities, and in the city as a whole. And your willingness to listen, I have to tell you that I'm absolutely thrilled. And again, thank you for that, because it's really important. And I know that, you know, we're in difficult times, and some people will say, where do we get all this money from to be investing in our young people? But just think about it. If we don't invest in our young people, what is our future like? It actually would not be good. So I thank the mayor for his leadership. The City of Toronto is committed to putting programs and services in place that supports residents in our various communities across the city. Because we cannot do this alone, as the mayor has indicated, we are working closely with many community organizations who are well placed to address local needs. Our youth violence prevention grants are an example of how we, in fact, can help these organizations to carry out their essential community building, because this is really what this is all about. It's building community, it's uplifting them, it's creating opportunity, it's creating hope, it's giving kids and families a better look at developing a better future and growth. And at the end of the day, it benefits all of us in this city of Toronto. The organizations selected to receive these grants have proven track records for working with youth most vulnerable to involvement in serious violence and crime. They were chosen by panels that include youth from the identified communities, according to the city's youth engagement strategy. Youth violence and safety are vital to this demographic. So it makes perfect sense to engage this impacted group as part of the process, part of the decision-making. We learn a lot from them, and we are better able to put programs in place to actually help them for better outcomes. As the mayor mentioned, the roots of community violence stems from inequities in our city, from diminishing social determinants of health that often leaves residents vulnerable. Youth violence prevention intervention programs are proven effective ways to curb violence amongst our young people. And this is extremely important for us to take an approach that recognizing what are the things that are needed to help our young people to stem and steer them away from violence. We know all too often when we hear the news, another gun incident, another knife incident, another violent incident in this city. There are things that we can do and we are doing, and as the mayor has indicated, we will be doing more to address these issues because we will not allow them to go unchecked. To be left unchecked means an unsafe city. Nobody wants an unsafe city, and everyone wants us to do everything possible to help all of our young people because they are, in fact, our future, and they are our assets for growth and development in our society. We are providing that leadership and an understanding of that undertaking in terms of our collaboration with community organizations to help to make our community better. So these programs, through these programs, vulnerable young people are equipped with the life skills they need to avoid violence and crime and to make a positive future and to make positive choices for themselves. At least one of these organizations is in my ward, and I'm looking forward to working with the organizations, but I'm more importantly looking forward to the positive impacts that will come from these organizations' involvement with young people. So the young people will actually benefit. And so those impacts will have a great impact on all young people in our community and impact for all of us and the benefits for everyone. So now I'll turn it back over to Mayor Tory for questions. Mayor?
Thank you, Mayor Tory and Deputy Mayor Thompson. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us. As a reminder, it's one question, one follow-up. We also have Denise Campbell, Executive Director of Social Development, Finance, and Administration on the line to answer your questions. First up, we have Mark McAllister from City News. Go ahead, Mark.
Good morning. Two questions. First, related to your announcement this morning, and then, Mayor, I don't know if you have some of the specifics from these organizations or whether Denise on the phone might have this, but what were some of the things that were submitted and ultimately were selected to come forward? What are these programs going to be doing specifically with each of these organizations?
I'll just give you some ideas, and Denise may want to expand on it, but I have the material right in front of me. So in the case of one that is being done by Albion Neighborhood Services, they're going to provide individualized case management, for example. And we found through the focus tables, this is a very effective way to take people most at risk or sometimes highest risk and actually work individually with them and bring a whole lot of resources to bear on one individual case to help keep those kids on a better path. Another one that I see here is looking at kids who are out of high school. There are programs like Pathways to Education that deal with kids that are in school and keeping them in school, but there are kids who have dropped out of school and they're at risk. Another one talks quite a lot about mental health. Another one here talks about diverting kids who've been suspended or expelled from school to local community-based workshops that actually get people some skills that they can put to work and improve their training. There's just a whole range of things, and the whole key here was that individual organizations from individual communities that had previously been identified as having higher incidence put their ideas forward as to what would work best in their neighborhoods in their view. And then the city staff obviously looked at these to make sure that they were sensible and realistic, and picked them accordingly. But I think that's the really important part of this program is, it's, as I said, it's by the community, of the community, and put forward by people from the community. Denise, did you want to add to that?
I think just additionally, Mayor Tory, certainly some of the applications include skill building and training for young people, so particularly around things like STEM programming that young people have asked for, and supporting them to create meaningful employment opportunities, which takes on a particularly new meaning in the economy as we find ourselves trying to recover from COVID. Mindfulness and mental health workshops will be part of some of the proposals, as well as youth leadership training. So it's really a range, and as both Mayor Tory and Deputy Mayor Thompson spoke about, it's really responding to some of the key things that young people from those neighborhoods have identified as areas where they need support in order to participate in achieving overall community safety.
Thank you. A follow-up question for Mayor Tory. Obviously, the first thing you addressed this morning is the announcement from the province that we're expecting later today about moving into stage 3. From the news release that was sent early this morning, it seems as though the recommendations coming forward from the city for additional measures in stage 3 will in fact be put in place. Is that correct? And how are you feeling about the fact that you've been listened to?
I just want to say that throughout this entire pandemic, I have listened to the advice of our medical officer of health, and the Premier of Ontario has listened to my representations in that regard, and to the representations of our medical officer of health. I think the listening and the dialogue back and forth has been excellent here, and this is just one more example of that. Now, we're going to proceed today to implement the measures because we don't yet have the details and nothing has been finalized by the province, but they've been very responsive in a number of the areas we put forward. We will proceed with our own measures here, and then we can always deal with those in a different way if it turns out that there's some duplication, because the provincial order is always preferable because it comes from a stronger legislative base and is wider reaching. But I'm very happy that there has been this continued dialogue, not just on this, but all the way through this, and I think that's why we've had good results.
Thanks, Mark. Next up, we have Jennifer Pagliaro from the Star. Go ahead, Jennifer.
Good morning, Mayor. I just wanted to follow up on that because it's not exactly clear to me from the province's press release. They say they're supportive of the recommendations. It doesn't actually say that they're ordering them for Toronto specifically. So you're saying you don't have that information, but there is perhaps a way that Toronto could implement those on their own. Can you just clarify that?
We will proceed ahead today to put the measures in front of City Council just to be sure that these things are looked after from a local perspective as far as we can go. But as has been mentioned before, there are some areas where our legislative ability is limited or where we don't have any at all. The only reason that I think we're all a bit uncertain as yet on exactly what the province will be doing, though I think from our discussions we know some of the things they are likely to do and perhaps less likely to do, is because the actual approval of those orders, I understand, may not come until tomorrow. And so in that sense, I just am not speaking with certainty about it because I don't want to preempt the decision-making process that has to take place at Queen's Park involving the Cabinet. But our discussions have been complete enough that I know that a number of the things we've talked about as to how we can make sure that, for example, bars and restaurants remain safe will be implemented by them. Some others that may not be, we will do here to the extent we can at City Hall.
And obviously, the province has made the decision that the city can go ahead with reopening bars and restaurants. You know, I spoke to a few epidemiologists and others yesterday, and I wonder if the city has ever considered the possibility of not opening bars and restaurants at all in stage 3 and instead focusing, for example, on moving forward with childcare, schools, and other things that we know carry additional risk. Almost everything in stage 3 carries some additional risk. And why focusing on bars and restaurants seems to be a priority is mystifying to some of them. Can you just comment on that?
Well, first of all, I can tell you, because we have now been briefed on some of the plans that are almost complete with respect to the reopening of schools, and I don't want to speak for anybody else except to say that I think most people who have seen those plans are impressed with them, and they represent a huge effort that has been made by the Government of Ontario to get the opening of schools right, with our help, wherever we can help, in a number of respects, including, of course, especially on public health. And so I think that while there's been more public discussion about bars, and in our case, we've said more about that because we have jurisdiction to some extent, or shared responsibility for that, which we don't directly have for schools because of the school boards that have that responsibility. But we certainly care about it very deeply. And I would just say that since the bars and restaurants were going to open the minute, theoretically, that we moved into stage 3, it was an urgent matter that we have the safety that goes with that, the health safety looked after from minute 1. And so we have paid attention to that, and the province has listened. And so I would say that there's been priority placed on all of these matters, with no lack of priority placed on school reopening, as I think we'll see in the coming days when they announce their plans. But we had to look after this other matter as well, of the bars and restaurants. To answer your first part of your question, we did have some discussion about not having bars open at all. And I will just say that there are some practical implications behind that. What's a bar versus, what isn't? There are many bars inside of restaurants. We talked about as well the balancing act we've had to go through with respect to everything we've done through the pandemic, which is that the principal and main focus has to be and is on public health. But we can't be ignoring the fact that the economy has a lot of people out of work, and as even the medical officer for health herself has said, that can have an impact on health in terms of people's mental health and their ability to cope with their lives if they're out of work and continue to be out of work for a long time. And so I think we've got this just about right. I mean, I think we have delayed stage 3 in consultation with the province for a time that I think is very appropriate. But nonetheless, we're moving forward to try to bring the city back to something approaching normal. And that involves a lot of time and attention spent, yes, on education, but it also involves time and attention spent on the economy and elements of the economy that employ a lot of people and that are part of people's daily lives.
That's it for today. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.